Before we begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from tonight? Drop it in the comments, our pack stretches farther than you think. And make sure you stay with me until the very end, you won't want to miss how this story unfolds. The clock above the counter ticked toward midnight. The cafe was nearly silent, save for the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint scraping of her rag across the polished wood. Outside, the streets were asleep, bathed in the pale glow of the moon. It was closing time, the kind of hour when strangers should be at home, not wandering into small cafes. Lila sighed as she stacked the last chair onto the table, her apron wrinkled, her hair tied back from a long shift. The bell above the door had been locked 30 minutes ago. She was alone. Or at least, she thought she was. The sound came sudden, a sharp chime of the door. Her head snapped up, heart thudding. That was impossible. She'd turned the key herself. But then he stepped in. Tall. Broad-shouldered. A presence that seemed to fill the cafe and press against the walls. His boots thudded against the floor as if each step was deliberate, carved into the earth itself. A dark coat brushed his thighs, its collar dusted with the chill of the night. And then, those eyes. Golden. Burning like a storm trapped in a man's face. Lila's breath caught. Every instinct screamed danger. Yet something else, something deeper, stirred inside her chest, making her wolf restless, claws scraping against the walls of her control. He didn't ask if the cafe was closed. He didn't apologize for barging in. Instead, his voice rolled low, smooth but edged with command. One last coffee. The words were simple. But they struck her like a claim. Lila straightened, trying to keep her voice steady. We're closed. He tilted his head, studying her with a gaze that made the room smaller, hotter. For a heartbeat, she swore the lights dimmed, as if the cafe itself bowed to him. Then the corner of his mouth curved, not into a smile, but something sharper. Then you'll make one more, he said. For me. Her wolf bristled. Who was he to command her? She wasn't his servant. And yet, as she looked at him, a flicker of recognition coiled in her gut. Not recognition of his face, but of his presence. Of the way the air shifted around him, thick with dominance. She hesitated. And that hesitation felt dangerous. Still, she turned, reaching for the coffee pot. Her hands trembled only slightly, but she prayed he wouldn't see. Behind her, she could feel his gaze heavy on her shoulders, on every small movement she made. It wasn't lust. It wasn't even curiosity. It was something older, primal. As if his wolf had already scented hers and decided she wasn't leaving this night unchanged. When she set the steaming cup down on the counter, he didn't reach for it right away. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his elbows against the wood, his golden eyes never leaving hers. You're brave, he murmured. Lila blinked. For serving coffee? No, his voice deepened, rumbling low. For not trembling. For standing here when every instinct in your blood is telling you to run. Her throat tightened. He wasn't wrong. Her body was screaming. But her pride was louder. She lifted her chin, forcing her voice to stay firm. I don't scare easy. For the first time, his mouth curved into something real, a smile, faint, dangerous, and devastating. Good, he said softly. Because I don't take well to cowards. The words might have been a threat. But the way he said them, like a test she'd just passed, sent heat racing under her skin. He finally lifted the cup, sipping slowly. His gaze never broke from hers. It was as though the coffee was an excuse, a performance, and she was the true focus of the night. The silence stretched, thick, electric. And then, outside, she heard it, scraping against the glass, low growls just beyond the door. Shadows moved in the dark, slipping closer. Her wolf snapped inside her, a warning howl echoing through her chest. She gasped, spinning toward the sound. What was that? The golden-eyed man set the cup down gently. Too gently. Then he stood. His presence swelled, his shadow stretching across the cafe floor like a beast awakening. Rogues, he growled. The word was more wolf than man. Before she could respond, the window shattered. Figures poured through, wild eyes, teeth bared, claws glinting under the moonlight. Lila stumbled back, heart racing. The rogues snarled, their gaze landing on her like predators scenting prey. But before they could lunge, the stranger moved. He was no longer just a man. He was a storm. With one brutal strike, he sent the first rogue crashing into the tables. His growl shook the walls, vibrating through the air until Lila's very bones trembled. His wolf surged beneath his skin, half-shifted, golden eyes blazing with fury. The cafe exploded into chaos, splintering wood, shattering glass, snarls that filled the night. Lila pressed against the counter, eyes wide as he tore through them with terrifying precision. Each movement was controlled, lethal. He was dominance made flesh. And then it was quiet. Rogues broken, driven off into the night. He stood there, chest heaving, golden eyes glowing like fire. Blood streaked his knuckles, but he looked untouched, untouchable. His gaze snapped back to her, and in it, she saw no question, no doubt. You, he said, his voice raw, thunderous. You're coming with me. Lila shook her head, her lips parting in protest. I don't even know you. Yes, he cut in, his eyes burning brighter. But your wolf knows me. And I know you. She froze, her chest rising and falling too fast. He stepped closer, the smell of cedar and smoke filling the air between them. You belong to me, he murmured. And I don't leave what's mine in the open. Lila's pulse thundered. Every instinct screamed to run. And yet, the bond, silent, dangerous, undeniable, tightened inside her like a chain. And as the moonlight streamed through the shattered window, silver and eternal, she whispered to herself. What have I just stepped into? The cafe smelled of scorched wood and spilled coffee. Shards of glass glittered across the floor like scattered stars, the remains of the rogue attack still fresh in Lila's mind. Her heart hadn't slowed since. It thundered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat that refused to quiet. Damien stood in the wreckage, his broad shoulders framed by the silver glow of the moon pouring through the broken window. His golden eyes were still burning, sharp and dangerous, as though the battle wasn't finished, as though he was still hunting. Lila's breath caught. She wanted to demand answers, to shove him out of her cafe and slam the door behind him. But the words tangled on her tongue. Because deep down, beneath the shock and fear, something else lingered. Recognition. A pull she couldn't explain. Damien stepped closer, his boots crunching over glass. She stiffened as he approached, instinct screaming to retreat, but her feet rooted in place. His gaze held her like chains. You didn't run, he said at last, his voice low, edged with something like approval. Lila swallowed hard. Should I have? He tilted his head, studying her the way a wolf studies prey, not with hunger, but with sharp, assessing focus. Most would have bolted. But you stood still. Watched. His lips curved faintly. Brave. Her hands clenched against her apron. You keep calling me that. Maybe I'm just frozen. He shook his head, the faintest trace of amusement flickering in his eyes. No. Frozen is fear. What I saw was defiance. The word sent a shiver down her spine. Defiance. No one had ever looked at her like that, as if her refusal to cower was something rare, something dangerous. Damien's gaze swept the cafe, then returned to her, heavier than before. It isn't safe for you here anymore. The rogues came for you. For me, she whispered, disbelief coloring her tone. They don't even know me. He leaned in slightly, his golden eyes glinting. They know your scent. Her wolf stirred inside her, restless and uneasy. She bit her lip, shaking her head. You're wrong. I'm no one. Just a girl running a cafe. You're not no one, Damien growled, his voice vibrating through the air, through her bones. And your wolf knows that as well as mine does. Her throat tightened. She wanted to argue, to tell him he was crazy, but her body betrayed her. Her pulse quickened, her chest tightened, her wolf clawed at her insides with something close to recognition. She forced herself to look away, but he caught her chin gently between his fingers, tilting her face back toward him. The touch was surprisingly careful for a man so ruthless, but the weight of it still sent a shock racing through her. Look at me, he commanded softly. And she did. Silver to gold. Her defiance sparking against his dominance like flint to steel. Who are you? She whispered. He smiled faintly, though there was no warmth in it. Only inevitability. I am Damien. Alpha King of these lands. The words landed heavy, undeniable. She'd heard the stories whispered by travelers, of the ruthless Alpha who ruled with an iron will, who crushed rebellions with his claws, who refused every Luna offered to him. He was legend and nightmare both. And now he stood in her cafe, golden eyes locked on her as though fate itself had dragged him through her door. Her knees weakened, but she forced herself to stay upright. Why here? Why me? Damien's gaze flicked down to her trembling hands, then back to her silver eyes. Because the moon doesn't make mistakes. Lila shook her head fiercely, breaking away from his touch. No. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in fated anything. He chuckled low, the sound dark, dangerous. Then you'll learn. Before she could respond, movement stirred outside. Figures watching from the shadows. Not rogues this time, but men in dark cloaks, wolves masked in human form. Guards. His guards. Damien's voice rumbled like thunder. You're coming with me. Lila stepped back sharply, her chest rising too fast. No. This is my home. His eyes flared brighter, his wolf pushing to the surface. Not anymore. You're mine, and mine do not stay unprotected. Her lips parted, fury sparking. You don't get to decide that. He closed the distance between them in a single stride, his presence crashing over her like a storm. She tilted her head back, chin lifted, refusing to bend even as his golden eyes bore into hers. I decide everything, Damien growled, his voice rough with dominance. Then softer, dangerously soft, especially when it comes to what's mine. The room felt smaller, the air thick with heat, with power, with the bond neither of them could deny. Lila's wolf howled inside her, torn between fear and something sharper, something that felt like recognition, like surrender. She forced her voice out, trembling but steady. And if I refuse? Damien's smile returned, slow and devastating. Then you'll learn the hard way what it means to fight fate. He lifted his hand again, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek, his touch gentler this time, almost reverent. But I think you already know, Lila. Deep down, your wolf already chose. Her breath shook. Her fists clenched. She wanted to scream, to deny him, to tear herself free from the pull that coiled tighter with every word he spoke. But the bond thrummed louder, undeniable, unbreakable. And as the guards stepped inside, waiting for their king's command, Lila whispered the only words that escaped her lips. This isn't over. Damien's golden eyes glowed brighter, his smile sharper. No, he murmured. It's only just begun. The night air outside the cafe was sharp with smoke and broken glass. The wreckage of the attack lingered, but Damien didn't glance back. He guided Lila through the shadows as if the ruins of her world no longer mattered. His stride was steady, purposeful, the kind of stride that belonged to a man who had never known fear. Lila, however, felt fear pressing against every bone. Her wolf clawed inside her chest, restless and unsettled. She pulled against his grip. "Let me go," she hissed, her voice trembling but defiant. "I didn't ask for this. I didn't ask for you." Damien stopped, golden eyes flashing in the moonlight. His hand tightened around hers, not painfully, but with a finality that left no room for argument. "You think this is a choice," he growled. "The rogues that came for you tonight, they'll come again. And next time, they won't stop until you're theirs." Her breath hitched. "Why me?" He leaned closer, his voice lowering into something dangerous and intimate. "Because you're more than what you think you are, Lila. You don't feel it yet? The way your wolf claws at you when I'm near? The way the moon pulls tighter around us both?" She shook her head fiercely. "No. I don't believe in fate. I believe in freedom." A faint, dangerous smile tugged at his lips. "Then you've never met fate head-on. Until now." Before she could respond, the wind shifted. The hair at the back of her neck rose, her wolf snarling in warning. Damien's gaze flicked toward the alleyway. Shadows moved, dark figures, their eyes glinting red, teeth flashing as they crept forward. Rogues. More of them. Lila's heart thundered. "They followed us." Damien cut her off with a sharp growl. "Stay behind me." The rogues emerged, a dozen this time, circling, their low growls filling the night. Their leader stepped forward, his grin jagged and cruel. "Alpha King," he sneered. "Didn't expect to find you in a human town. But luck seems to be with us tonight." The healer girl, the one with silver eyes, his gaze cut to Lila, sharp and hungry. "She belongs to us." Damien's growl rolled like thunder, deep and primal. "Touch her, and I'll rip the marrow from your bones." The rogue laughed. "You can't protect her forever. We know what she is." Word spreads fast. Every clan will come for her. Even you can't fight them all. Lila's stomach dropped. Every clan? Every wolf? Her? She shook her head, whispering under her breath, "I'm no one," but her wolf stirred violently at the words, as if rejecting the denial. Damien stepped forward, his power radiating like heat. "You're right about one thing," he snarled, claws sliding from his hands, fangs flashing under the moonlight. "You can't fight fate. But tonight, you'll learn what happens when you challenge me." The rogues lunged. The alley exploded in violence. Damien shifted halfway, his wolf bursting through his skin in flashes of muscle and fur. He moved like a storm, claws slicing, jaws snapping, his growls vibrating through stone and shadow. Rogues fell one by one, broken under his wrath. But not all. Two slipped past him, their eyes locked on Lila. She stumbled back, her wolf howling inside her chest. One rogue lunged, claws raised, and instinct took over. Lila threw up her hands, and a surge of heat and silver light burst from her palms. The rogue screamed, stumbling backward as the glow seared his skin. The second froze, eyes wide with recognition. "She's the one," he rasped. "The silver-eyed healer." Damien's roar cut him short. He struck, tearing the rogue down with brutal precision. Silence fell, broken only by Lila's ragged breathing. Her hands still glowed faintly, silver light fading into nothing. She stared at them in shock. What did I just do?" Damien turned to her, blood streaking his jaw, golden eyes blazing with something fiercer than fury. "Oh. You revealed yourself, he said softly, though his voice carried the weight of thunder. Your gift. Your wolf's truth. Lila shook her head, tears stinging her eyes. No, I didn't mean to. He stepped closer, his presence overwhelming, his scent of cedar and smoke thick around her. You've been hiding it your whole life, haven't you? Pushing it down, pretending you were just ordinary. But fate doesn't care about pretending. Fate carves what it wants into our blood. Her throat tightened. And now what? They'll keep coming, won't they? Because of this? Damien's gaze softened just slightly, though his wolf still burned hot in his eyes. Yes. They'll come. And that's why you won't face it alone. You're mine, Lila. You always were. And I will kill every last one of them before I let them take you. Her chest rose sharply, her heart a storm. Part of her wanted to scream at him, to fight the chains of his words. But another part, the wolf inside her, howled in fierce agreement, trembling at the power of his vow. The rogues lay broken at their feet, but the night was far from calm. Lila could feel it in her bones, in the restless tug of the bond threading tighter between her and Damien. This was only the beginning. And as he reached for her hand, guiding her away from the blood-stained alley, she whispered to herself. What if fate already decided? And what if I can't escape it? The road to Damien's stronghold wound like a black ribbon through the hills, moonlight catching the serrated edges of the stone walls long before they came into view. Lila rode in silence, the cart's wheels creaking, her hands clenched white around the hem of her coat. The city lights had given way to raw night, trees, wind, and the constant, low thrum of wolves moving beneath the skin of the earth. Damien walked beside her, his silhouette a steady shadow. Guards flanked them, quiet, watchful, and everything about them spoke of a kingdom that obeyed a single will. They'd escorted her through alleys and back roads, away from prying eyes and gossiping tongues. Yet being hidden felt less like protection and more like a signal. She had been taken from the ordinary. When the fortress appeared, it rose from the ground like a crown of black stone. Towers stabbed the sky, banners snapped in the wind, and gargoyles carved in bronze bore witness to centuries of claim. Torches burned along the ramparts, painting the walls in molten gold. It was not a place built for comfort. It was built to last, to defend, to rule. Lila swallowed past a knot of dread. It's big, she said, absurdly small in the echo of that voice. Damien's chuckle was low, almost fond. It's ours, he said. Or rather, it will be yours as much as mine, if you choose to stay. The gate groaned open, and they passed inside. The courtyard swallowed the cart with a hush that felt like reverence. Wolves, men and women who bore the line of his pack, moved through the shadows with practiced discipline. Their eyes flicked to Lila and then down, a bowed acknowledgement of the king's will, not curiosity. A different rule here, she thought, obedience first, questions later. She wanted to protest. To demand the key to her freedom. Instead the walls, the banners, the way the wind seemed to listen when Damien ordered, pressed down on her like the gravity of inevitability. They brought her to a chamber carved high within the heart of the fortress. It looked out over the moors, endless dark broken by pale lakes and silver rivers. Stone tasted older here, each slab hummed with history, battles, bargains, broken vows, and oaths. Damien stood at the window, watching the moon pool over the land as if drawing meaning from its reflection. Lila set down the small satchel that had been handed to her, her few belongings wrapped in a cloth, and scanned the room. It was austere. A heavy bed, simple tapestries, and a table with herbs and jars lined like silent witnesses. Not luxurious, not cruel, practical. It felt as if everything in it had purpose. You can wash, Damien said, his voice softer than it had been below. Eat. Rest. Tomorrow you meet the healers and the elder council. They will want to test you. Her laugh came out half a sob. Test me? I'm a barista who learned bandages and poultices from my father. You learned enough, he said, eyes burning with a storm she couldn't name. They don't need a barista. They need a healer. He left her then, closing the door with the same finality as every decision he made. Lila sank onto the edge of the bed, fingers finding a seam in the coverlet as if it could anchor her. The fortress felt alive around her, the floor thrumming with a heartbeat that was not hers. For the first time since the rogues, a cold doubt crept through her. What had she agreed to by not running? What would life be if she accepted this throne of stone and blood? The evening passed in a blur of showers and furtive glances. She washed until the water ran red with the grime of the streets and the salt of fear. She tried to eat but found she had no appetite. The herbs on the table looked like strange, mute soldiers. When sleep finally took her, it came in jagged breaths beneath a sky that felt dangerously close. Morning arrived with the clang of the great bell. It rang once, twice, calling the fortress awake. She dressed in simple garments that had been provided, muted colors, sturdy fabric, no unnecessary frills. When she stepped into the corridor, the sound of walking gathered like a tide. Healers in gray robes moved with measured steps, warriors polished armor, young betas trained in the yard like storms contained. An elder woman intercepted her outside the infirmary, silver hair braided tight, eyes sharp as flint. You are the healer from the town, the elder asked, voice no nonsense. Her gaze ran over Lila with the practiced appraisal of someone who had seen many come and go. They say you healed the king's wolves. Lila's mouth remembered humility. I did what I could. Then we will see what you can do. The elder inclined her head. We don't tolerate mistakes. Tests followed, a fevered man in the guard's quarters, a clawed wound that reeked of rot, an infant with a fever so high his breath rattled like a bell. Lila worked. Her hands stung, she crushed herbs, boiled roots, and stitched where sinew had been frayed. The other healers watched, sometimes with scrutiny, sometimes with a glint of grudging respect. The elder's gaze never left her, a steady weighing that kept her from arrogance. Between patients, Damien drifted through like a storm to be consulted, an order here, a command there. But he always returned to stand at the door, watching her with those molten golden eyes. She could feel him like a presence at her back, guardian and jailer, always near enough to sense, never near enough to be in reach. By midday, word had spread through the fortress. The elder pulled her aside. You have a gift, she said bluntly. Not everyone can channel the light the way you do. It's old magic, tied to the line of wolves who kept their human hearts. And what does that mean? Lila asked, ashamed of how small her voice sounded. It means you will be hunted, the elder replied. And it means that this place will either make you steal or shatter you. She studied Lila, softer now. You can choose to learn it, to hone it. Or you can retreat into a life where men will come and use you. Lila's knees trembled. I don't know how to choose. You do, the elder said. You came here. That tells me more than your words. When night came, Damien found her on the ramparts. The wind knifed through her hair, the land below spread like a secret. He said nothing at first, simply sliding an arm around her waist with an intimacy that made her breath catch. Up close, his scent, cedar, iron, smoke, was a shadow she recognized now, like a song remembered at the edge of sleep. You did well, he said at last. You have a skill that will save us. Or mark me for every hunter, Lila whispered. Both can be true, he murmured. Power is dangerous. But in this place, you will have allies. His hand tightened, not possessive so much as possessive by default, an alpha's claim wrapped in the language of protection. She looked at him, the enormity of the fortress behind him, a kingdom built on teeth and oath. What do you want from me, Damien? Truly? He leaned his forehead to hers, voice rough with something like confession. Not to own you. To stand beside you. To keep you. To make you mine with choice, not chains. His eyes searched hers as if asking permission and taking it at the same time. Lila closed her eyes. The moon glowed like a promise beyond the ramparts. The fortress hummed around them, alive, waiting. In her chest, 2 hearts warred, one beating for freedom, the other answering the pull of a claim she could not yet name. She had come to Damien's stronghold as a stranger, stolen from a life of coffee and small comforts. Now, between stone and moonlight, she realized the truth was sharper than any choice. This world would change her. Whether it broke her or made her queen depended on a road neither of them had walked before. When the bell tolled at the hour of midnight, she pressed her palm to the cold stone and whispered into the wind, half challenge, half question. If this is fate, then I will learn its name. But I will not be owned without my voice. Damien's grip on her hand tightened, answering a vow she had not yet dared to say aloud. Then we will teach you how to speak it, he promised. And the fortress, ancient and watchful, listened. Rumors traveled faster than any messenger in Damien's lands. By the time Lila stepped into the infirmary that morning, a hush had already fallen, a hush that said more about fear than hope. Men and women lay on pallets, their skin flushed with fever, breaths shallow and rapid. The air tasted of bile and bitter herbs. The other healers moved like ghosts, faces drawn, hands trembling with exhaustion and the weight of failure. Young one, the elder who had tested her before, said without ceremony, beckoning Lila closer. This is the center of it. They came back worse. The cures we gave, potions, poultices, prayers, none held. If you are truly what they say, then prove it now. Lila's palms were clammy when she touched the first patient's forehead. He was a hunter, one of the king's scouts, eyes half-lidded, fever burning his face to a ruddy mask. Around him, mothers whispered, warriors knelt, and the fortress exhaled in a way that made Lila's chest ache. She set her jaw, feeling the old lessons, her father's hands guiding hers in the flashbacks of grinding roots and whispering names of plants. But this was no ordinary fever. It pulsed like a living thing, a darkness that clung to breath and bone. It mocked the ordinary cures. Tell me what you know, the elder demanded. Spare me rituals that do not help. Lila inhaled, steadying herself. It moves like heat and rot together, she said aloud, describing what she'd already felt when the rogues attacked. Not just infection. Something that eats at the wolf blood, at the spirit. You bind the fever with bitter ash and willow, then cool with fever mint poultice. Keep their bodies moving, sweat it out, but gently. And, she hesitated, voice dropping into the private language of the healers, I can try to draw it out. The room stilled. Draw it out. The phrase hovered like a dangerous promise. The elder's face was unreadable. You understand what that risks? She asked. To draw it means you take on part of the burden. Your blood answers to the wolves as well. I know, Lila whispered, surprised at how steady the answer felt. Whatever lay in the fortress, fate, bond, whatever name Damien's world gave it, had already threaded through her. She didn't want to be the queen of pain, but she could not watch them burn. They set to work. Lila moved through the infirmary like someone who'd been born into this moment, an accidental queen of herb and heat. She measured, crushed, rapped, sang the old words her father had taught in an undertone until they became a hum under her breath. The healers watched, some openly skeptical, some with the hungry interest of those who will accept help when it comes. When she took a patient in her hands and whispered to the fever, encouraging it, gathering it like wind into a fist, the air around her seemed to respond. The candles burned straighter, the torches drew closer. Her palms warmed with odd silver light that didn't feel like heat so much as recognition, as if something deep in the fortress had answered her. The first night was the hardest. The fever fought, and Lila felt it in her bones, a hollow ache that threaded up into her jaw. She gritted her teeth and let the pain come, taking the fever's heat onto herself, willing it into the poultice, into the herbs, into the cool water she poured over wrapped cloths. The man's breathing eased. His brow cooled. A mother began to sob, half grief, half relief, and thanked Lila with a voice that shook the rafters. By dawn, 3 had brightened, by noon, 5 more. The elder watched with hard-set lips but eyes that had softened. Word moved like storm winds. The healer from the town had touched the fever and not broken. Damien stood at the doorway through it all, a silent storm of gold and shadow. He watched her hands, the way she worked under pressure, and something like pride, or a fiercer thing, twisted his features. He approached only when the lull came, when a patient's breath stilled into the regular rhythm of healing. "You saved him," he said simply, as if the words were enough to crown her. His presence was close and soft, a paradox after the night he'd driven rogues through glass. "We saved him," Lila corrected, though her voice still trembled. "You gave me the chance." Her throat tightened. She didn't mean to acknowledge how much his protection mattered, but the truth pressed like a bloom against fragile skin. He didn't argue. Instead he folded his hands behind his back and studied the room as one studies a map. "You did what no one here could." The golden light in his eyes dimmed for an instant, and Lila thought she saw something fragile, relief, break the surface of his iron. "They will call you miracle. They will call you danger. Both are true." The elder approached, her face a stone mask of authority. "The council must meet," she said. "You will stand before them and be examined. They will probe what you are, if you are a threat, a blessing, an instrument. Be prepared." Lila's stomach tightened. Council. Elders. Politics. The fortress had an order, a rhythm, and the council orchestrated every step. She had thought the battle and the fever would be the hard parts. She had not yet met court. That afternoon, the hall where the council gathered smelled of old wax and colder ambition. Stone chairs ringed a central table. The elders took their seats with the gravity of those who handle lives like coins. Damien did not sit, but he stood near the throne, a silent fulcrum. When Lila entered, heads turned. Some faces were allies, old warriors, the elder who had given her a chance, while others wore the thin veneer of politeness that meant another currency, skepticism. "You are the one who claims to draw out the fever?" a councilman asked, his tone sharp enough to cut. "I am the one who did it," Lila replied. She kept her voice level. "I will show you how. I will answer any test you set." They questioned her, where her gifts came from, whether she had lineage ties, what price she expected in return for the work she could do. The questions were practical, but the subtext was brutal. Who benefits, and at what cost? The throne in the room, the idea of it, hummed with the unspoken calculus of power. Damien's answer was simple and cold. "She saved my wolves. She stays." A murmur rolled through the hall. Some bowed to the king's will, others stiffened at the implication. The elder who had watched Lila most closely spoke then, softer than the councilman but with more weight. "Power without control can burn," she warned. "We will train her. She will not be a weapon without hands that understand it." Lila felt the council's eyes as if they could see the silver light still faint on her palms. "I want to learn," she said. "I don't want to be used." "You won't," Damien answered. "Not if I can help it. Not if I stand here." They set terms. She would stay. She would be tested and trained. She would be watched. Politics would find its angles, and whispers would ride the wind. But in the small moments between decrees and plans, Lila found that the fortress wasn't only stone and steel, it had people who would stand in the line of fire. The elder who had been hardest on her offered one thing unasked, a dry bread and a nod of respect. That night, as the torches guttered and the infirmary quieted into the careful breathing of those mending, Lila sat by a low window. Her hands were still sore, the silver light dimmed to a memory beneath her skin. Outside, the moon carved the world in silver. Damien joined her and did not speak at first. He watched her hands as if searing the sight into memory. Finally he said, low and intimate, "You carried pain into you and brought it back out. That's a kind of courage that will be needed." Lila rested her head against the cool stone. "Who am I becoming?" she whispered. He didn't answer with words. He answered with a look that held both claim and a strange, patient promise. "Someone I will not let be taken." And somewhere in the fortress, the council's plotting began, threads of favor and suspicion winding tighter. The fever had been pushed back for now, but the cost of victory had already been counted: attention, envy, and the first true proof that Lila was no ordinary woman. The moon had been a thin sliver when the messenger arrived at dawn, no more than a fingernail of silver, shy behind the clouds. By dusk it swelled, fattening to a pale coin, throwing the fortress in a cold, honest light. The air tasted like metal and old promises. Even the hearth seemed to hold its breath. In the great hall, courtiers and captains gathered. The banners stitched into the rafters looked down like patient witnesses. Lila walked between them with cautious steps, her robe modest, her hands folded. She was no longer a stranger in the stone house, but neither was she fully of it. Every pair of eyes that touched her carried a question. Damien waited at the head of the hall, framed by the throne and the moonlight as if carved from the same shadow. He moved like a man who expected the world to bend when he breathed. When their gazes met, something unspoken rolled through the space between them, like a tide that would not be held back. He descended the dais and stopped before her, close enough that the smell of him, cedar, smoke, iron, was a living thing. The court fell into that peculiar hush that meant the Alpha was about to speak and the land would listen. He didn't bother with ceremony. He never had. "Lila," he said, voice low and precise. "You've healed my wolves. You saved lives. You have shown what old blood can do when it remembers itself." She bowed her head, a gesture of respect. "I did what I could." He took a step closer. "And because of that, because you are what you are no longer safe in the open. Every tooth that bites, every clan that smells weakness, they will come. I can offer you protection. I can offer you a place beside me." A murmur threaded the hall. Hands rustled. Even the elders turned their heads as if tuning to a frequency. Lila steadied herself. "You mean, stay here? Live in the fortress?" Damien's eyes softened with a flash of something like regret. "Stay here, train, learn, and be under my protection. Share my bed when the moon calls. Share my name." He let the last words sit between them, heavy and inevitable. She swallowed. The one sentence, "share my bed," carried an old, clawed weight. She had sworn not to be owned. She had sworn to keep the small life she still clung to. Yet standing beneath the banners, she felt the fortress truth: safety here came with price. "What if I refuse?" she asked, hearing the bravado in her own voice and hating its tremor. Damien's look grew hard, the golden rims of his eyes flaring. "If you refuse, you walk back into a world that wants what you are. Rogues, clans, those who trade in blood and fear, they will not wait for courtesy. You will be prey. You threaten me with death," she said quietly. "Is that mercy?" No, his voice was close now, no audience in his tone. It was private and absolute. "It is truth. But I am not offering only protection, Lila. I am offering a bargain." The hall narrowed into the space of the two of them. The council listened deftly, but the current between the Alpha and the healer thrummed as if it were its own law. "A bargain?" one of the elders asked, wary. Damien turned slightly, then came back to her, words measured like steel. You will remain here for 1 lunar cycle. You will train with our healers and our elders will test your gift. You will be provided shelter, tutors, allies. In return, you will accept a bond. At the next full moon, you will come to me and either accept the claim we both feel, publicly, as maid and queen, or you will walk away and I will release my claim. A breath ran through the hall, part shock, part the sound of a tide pulling back. Lila's mind flickered. Release his claim? The idea sounded like both a promise and a trap. She thought of the rogues, of the fevered faces, of the elders' words about politics. She thought of Damien's hands on the cart the night he'd taken her away, steady and unbending. And if I refuse to choose at the next full moon? She asked. Then the claim is kept by default, Damien said flatly. I do not negotiate for what the moon binds. Silence pressed in like a weight. In the corner, a young beta pressed his lips together. Someone shifted on their seat. Lila felt the gravity of 1,000 expectations settle on her shoulders like a cloak she had not asked for. She had come here to heal. Not to be placed at the fulcrum of a kingdom's future. Not to be the fulcrum itself. Why me? She asked, softer now. Why make me choose like this? Damien's voice lost its edge for a moment. He exhaled as if the question had landed where it had always been waiting. Because you drew light into yourself and turned it into life. Because I have waited 18 years for a spark I could not name, and when I saw you, every part of me remembered. Because I do not leave what is mine unclaimed. Because this, he gestured, encompassing the hall, the banners, the blood and bone of the land, this requires a queen who stands beside me, not a pawn given by another alpha. Lila's hands clenched. The word queen loomed like a sword. She thought of the café, the quiet rows of cups, the small stubborn joys that had anchored her. She felt, for a raw second, the dizzying vertigo of 2 lives, one with steam-stained mornings, one with iron-thrown rooms. Give me time, she said finally. You asked for a choice. Give me the nights between the moons to learn who I will be if I stay. I won't be a bargaining chip in council rooms. Damien's jaw tightened. For the first time since she'd known him, she saw him weigh something like patience against need. The Alpha King had a hunger that had driven him across wars, but there was also a side she had glimpsed, the man who'd laughed at a small girl once beneath a festival moon. That man lingered in the edges of his expression. You have until the next full moon, he agreed at last. At midnight, you will stand before the pack and give your answer. Come as my queen, or leave as a free woman. But know this, if you walk away, you will always be mine in the way that matters, the moon remembers. Lila met his stare, silver eyes and golden flame locked. The bargain unfolded before her like a map whose borders she'd never studied. To stay was safety wrapped in ownership. To walk was freedom wrapped in danger. To refuse was to be pulled apart by both. She found her voice steady, the decision not made but the terms accepted for now. I will stay, she said. I will learn. But not because I'm afraid. Because if I am to be part of this world, I will know its name. Damien stepped forward and, surprising the hall, dropped to one knee before her. Not in submission, never that, but in a gesture old as blood. Then we will teach one another, he said, low and intimate. I will protect you. Teach you to use what is in your hands. And if, at the full moon, you are still willing, then you will stand with me. Gasps threaded the room. Allies bowed. Dissenters stiffened. Lila's heart beat a storm of questions and a quiet resolve. The bargain had been struck, not in chains but in terms said aloud, witnessed by the pack and the moon. That night, she walked the ramparts alone, the deal fresh like an unhealed scar. The wind pressed into her face, carrying the smell of distant pines and something older, promise or peril, she could not tell. Below, the fortress moved with its steady, inevitable tasks. Above, the moon climbed, patient and absolute. She pressed her palm to the stone and whispered, one hand on earth and the other on fate, teach me, then. If this is the price, I will pay it on my own terms. The moon listened and, silver and impartial, waited. The great hall thrummed like a living thing. Torches burned in iron sconces, throwing long, breathing shadows across the stone. Silver banners hung from the rafters, each stitched glyph an oath and a history. Wolves, men and women seasoned in 100 small violences, filled the benches in a hush that was not silence but a readiness, the kind of quiet that waits for a storm to break. Lila stood at the far end of the hall and felt small as a single flame. The robe they had given her was simple and dark, nothing of the finery a queen might wear, but the eyes that watched weighed her as if she were already ornament. Her hands were folded at her waist, fingers white with the pressure of nerves. Around her, whispers curled like smoke, speculation, approval, dissent. Some faces softened when she passed, others were thin and wary. Damien took his place on the elevated dais as the moon pushed itself into the center of the sky. He looked carved from shadow and gold, an image meant to settle argument before it began. His presence swallowed the room, and yet his attention never left her. He watched like a man measuring tides, as if the ebb and flow of her will mattered more than the assembly itself. At the appointed hour the drums began, a slow compact of skin and intent that matched the beat inside Lila's own ribs. The elders called the pack to attention. A steward read the conditions aloud, Damien's bargain laid bare for all to hear, the trial, the term, the coming midnight decision. Lila listened. Each word landed like a coin on stone. The terms were fair enough in speech, the weight was in the watching. When the signal came, she walked forward. Each step echoed like a verdict. The crowd parted as if the hall itself had hands. For a moment she felt nothing but the granite beneath her boots and the sound of her breathing. Then every gaze found her again, sharp and hungry and curious. She stopped 3 paces from the dais and lifted her chin. Not kneeling. Not pleading. The defiance from the café, the stubbornness that had carried her through bandages and fever, rose in her like a tide. A murmur went through the hall. Whispers. Some offended gasps. A few approving grunts. Damien's jaw tightened, not with anger at her bravery but with the fierce, complicated hunger of a king who had longed to see the spark that would not bow. He descended the steps, quiet as a shadow. He could have spoken, declarations from the throne would have smoothed the ripples, but instead he moved with the intent of a predator closing the distance to claim what it had already marked. When he reached her, he didn't take her hand politely. He closed his fingers around her wrist with enough firmness that it registered on her skin, an iron press that said, I will not let this be overlooked. The touch sent a shiver through her, not all unwelcome, not all feared. The hall held its breath. You stand before the pack as their queen in waiting, he said, voice low so only they might feel it as a private thunder. But a queen must understand submission, not as shame, but as recognition of bond. Will you kneel and accept me now, in front of those who will follow us? Say it. Lila swallowed. The word kneel was 100 smaller words strung together, surrender, tradition, acceptance of a chain she had sworn she would not wear. She could picture herself on her knees, the banners watching, his hands maybe gentle, maybe not. Her wolf snarled against the idea, and something fierce rose in her chest. No, she heard herself answer, loud enough to ripple through the front rows. I will not kneel like a thing given away. Gasps rippled, outrage, awe, scandal. A few older wolves smiled, some at her spirit, some at the show. A councilman lifted his chin, disgust pinched into his face. Insolence, he muttered. Damien's fingers tightened for a breath, then relaxed as if testing a furnace and finding it hot. The line of his mouth was a hard edge. For a moment he looked like a man whose will could have unmade cities, and yet his eyes held a question like a fisher. He lowered his voice until it was only for her. You asked for time, he said. You have used it to learn the cost of what you are. You have chosen posture over petition. Tell me, Lila, do you deny the bond? Say you are not mine. Her throat constricted. Deny the bond? It hummed under her skin like a song she could no longer forget. She could lie and walk away into danger, pretend ignorance and hope the rogues would be distracted by new prey. Or she could stand and hold a truth that would bind her to a life she had not chosen but might learn to love on different terms. She met his gaze, silver to gold. I will not say I am yours because a throne demands it, she answered. But I do not deny what the moon has tethered beneath my skin. A ripple traveled through the hall, some softer, some sharp. A murmur of approval from those who respected a woman who kept her agency, a tight, disappointed hiss from those who read her words as an evasion. Damien's expression hardened and then, with a motion like a blade folding, softened. He drew her closer until the space between them was nothing. The press of his body against hers was an intrusion and a haven all at once. He lowered his voice to a growl that was almost a confession. Then prove it, he said. Not to me, to them. Show the pack what your blood can do when choice meets claim. Heal the man before us who has lain in fever since dawn. Draw what remains from him and make him whole. If you succeed, you will stand by my side with argument instead of subservience. If you fail, you will walk away. The elder's hand flicked to the man on the pallet, and eyes that had judged her now turned toward the task. The hall shifted to watch the trial as judge and jury alike. Lila's heart hammered, but beneath the fear coiled a curious resolve. This was not the coward's petition. This was arena and proof, the place where her hands could speak the truth in a language no politics could drown. She stepped forward, palms reaching for the fevered man, and felt the room constrict to the point of contact. Damien's presence at her back was a steady weight, protective, possessive, promise more than prison. Every eye watched as she laid her palms on the man's brow, closed them, and called the light inside her to work. It came, not easy but pure, a thread of silver unspooling from her chest into her palms, a humming current that stilled the man's tremors, cooled the fire in his veins, pulled the shadow from his breath. The hall, for all its stone and law, fell away. There was only motion, her hands, the slow ebb of fever, the patient rise of breath. When she finally straightened, the man's eyelids fluttered open, his face eased, the dark of illness lifting like a curtain. A sound rose, not quite a cheer, but close, the low, reverent noise of a pack recognizing. Damien's grip on her wrist loosened. He stepped forward and, with a movement that was equal parts claim and praise, bowed his head to her, not kneel, not subservient, but a king honoring a partner. You chose your terms and you met the world on them, he said, voice unsteady now with an emotion he rarely showed. At the full moon, you will stand and decide. Tonight, you proved you are worthy. Lila's chest heaved. The hall buzzed with a new current, respect threaded through the earlier doubt. She had not kneeled. She had not surrendered. She had shown them, and proved to herself, that whatever the bargain became, it would be on the terms of a woman who could stand. And as the drums faded and the moon watched with impartial silver, Damien let his forehead rest for a second beside hers, not claiming what she had not given, only promising the force he would bring to her side. The test had been met. The real choice still waited in the dark between the next heartbeat and the full moon. The morning that the rogues returned, the sky was iron, low, heavy, as if the air itself feared what was coming. Word ran through the fortress like wildfire. Scouts had seen a column moving through the moors, a dark snake of men and wolves bent on the king's halls. The bells screamed once, twice, a call that shook sleep from the bones of the stone. Damien's orders fell like thunder. Warriors donned armor like second skins, shields rose, and the courtyard became a living tide of steel and fur. Lila stood at the edge of the infirmary, hands damp from bandages, eyes hollow with weariness, when the first horn split the morning. She felt the old reflex, the healer's pull toward the injured, anchor her feet. Rogues or not, blood called to her like a bell. Stay inside, Damien snapped when he saw her heading for the gates. His voice was a rope of command threaded with something raw. This is not a place for you in the line. She met his gaze, silver to gold. Someone will need me, she said. They'll bleed where you fight. He searched her face as if weighing a life against a throne. You will not be a casualty in my war. And you will not be a murderer who takes my choice, she returned. The edge in her voice did not break him. It only sharpened the knot in his chest. He let go then, with a hardness that tasted like grief, and gave the order that would put her where she insisted, a small secure ring inside the courtyard, close enough for her hands to do what they must, far enough from the front to keep her alive. He posted guards like pillars around her, warriors whose look said they understood both his command and his fear. The battle came like rain. Rogues swarmed the outer walls, swift, brutal, and hungry. Arrows stitched the air. Steel sang. Wolves met wolves, teeth and claws finding armor and flesh. The courtyard became a violent choreography of survival. A man could be whole one heartbeat and bloodied the next. Lila's station filled fast. Wounded soldiers were carried in, faces white with pain, limbs crumpled, breath jagged as broken bells. She worked with hands that knew how to make quick choices under pressure, stem a bleed, set a bone, press cooling poultices to fevered skins. Her palms glowed faint and silver when she reached for the deep cuts, and soldiers who had moments before tasted the edge of death found their breath slowing, their skin cooling into color. Between cries and the rhythmic thud of shields meeting blades, Lila kept moving, a metronome of mercy. Men she had never met whispered her name like a prayer and clutched her fingers when she eased them into wakefulness. For a while the fortress felt like a single organism bent on breathing again. Then, a crack of sound split the action. Someone had breached the inner line. A lone figure slipped through the chaos, nimble and dark, eyes set on the infirmary ring where Lila worked. He moved like a shadow that had learned how to kill in silence. Lila didn't see him until he was close enough to cut the air with a blade. She felt, rather than saw, the shift, a sudden cold at the back of her neck, the whisper of intent that had no place in the heated air of battle. Her head snapped up. The assassin's blade arced toward her. Time thinned, Damien's voice became a bell, no, a roar. He was there before the man's heel hit the ground, a streak of motion, a storm wrapped in flesh. He slammed into the would-be killer with a force that snapped the air. Metal clashed. Bone met blade and the assassin's arm flew wide. Blood skittered across the stone like a dark flower. For a second the world narrowed to the two of them, Damien and the attacker, then widened again with the keening of men unknown. The rogue twitched out of Damien's grasp and lunged, but a second blade found him from a warrior at the rim. He fell. Silence snapped into place around that small violence like a lid. Damien stood over the fallen rogue, chest heaving, golden eyes blazing. When he turned, the sight of him, blood streaking his forearms, hair damp at the temple, all the poised danger of a hunting god, struck through Lila with a force that had nothing to do with the battle. She was shaking, not entirely from fear. Her body remembered the way his hands had steadied the cart. Her blood remembered the way his thumb had once brushed a strand of hair from her face. The war thrum in her veins warmed into something dangerous and bright. You would have died for me, she whispered, though she knew the answer. The roar around them still rolled. He looked at her, and for the first time since she'd come to the fortress, his expression split into something raw and unedited. I would burn the world down before I let anyone touch you, he said, voice rough, not to the crowd but to her. It was not a threat to anyone else, it was the absolute of a man unrolled into a single promise. The words landed like coals. Lila felt heat under her ribs, a sudden fury at her own trembling compliance and a strange, helpless answering ache under the wolf blood. She wanted to be angry, at the rogues, at the danger, at the way he could so easily name her as if she were a piece on his board, but she couldn't harness the emotion cleanly. It was mixed and wild, gratitude, fear, want, anger. As the tide of the battle turned, the king's warriors forcing rogues back, banners reclaiming the sky, Lila worked until the last of the wounded were tended. The courtyard stank of iron and dust and the sharp sweet tang of survival. Men knelt and cursed and laughed in a breath. The fortress had held. Damien found her then, his cloak splattered with the day's violence. He didn't speak at first. He simply crossed to where she sat on a low wall, hands still stained with the day's work, and sat beside her with a slowness that was intimate in its restraint. "You shouldn't have been there," he said, not as accusation but as raw admission of what he'd felt. "And you shouldn't have been fighting alone," she countered, voice small and ragged. He reached for her hand. The action was casual in the way of someone making a claim by habit, no fanfare, only pressure. She didn't pull away. "Tell me you don't feel this," he murmured suddenly, forehead coming close to hers. "Tell me you can walk away when the moon asks." Lila's breath hitched. The battle had cracked something open between them, an honest fissure of need. She tasted smoke and iron and him. "I can't," she admitted, the word brittle and true. "I tried to be brave on my own, but she broke off, hands trembling. His mouth found hers then, not gentle but urgent, a sealing kiss that carried the weight of men who had seen too much and wanted one thing with the force of the world. It was a collision of want and tired relief, of claim and consent tangled into one fierce motion. When they parted, both breathing hard, Lila's voice came out a whisper, a confession she hadn't planned. "I hate that I can't stop wanting you." Damien's laugh was not light, it was an answering growl of triumph. "Then don't hate it," he said, pressing his palm to her cheek. "Let me keep you." The night settled around them, the fortress scarred but standing. In the quiet that followed the scream of battle, their kiss hung in the air like something sacred and irreversible. The war had proven two things, that the world would claw for what Lila was, and that Damien would not hesitate to tear that world apart to protect her. But the bargain still waited, the full moon, the choice, the public weighing of their hearts. This night had given them a fierce, trembling closeness. It had not given them a final answer. As the embers cooled and the wounded were carried inside, Lila pressed her forehead to Damien's and whispered, "Steadier now, keep me. But don't ever mistake my wanting for surrender." He smiled, blades of tired light in his golden eyes. "I don't want your surrender," he said. "I want your side." And under the blood-streaked banners, with the moon hiding behind shifting clouds, they both felt the truth in that, dangerous, beautiful, and not yet finished. The fortress smelled of smoke and herbs and the iron aftertaste of too much blood. For days after the battle, soldiers paced with bandaged limbs and the steady twitch of adrenaline, mothers clasped children and counted breaths, the elder nurses moved like careful priests through the infirmary. But in the quieter corners, behind closed doors, on wind-swept battlements, another kind of work was being done, the slow, dangerous labor of two people learning what it meant to belong to each other. Lila woke with the echo of battle in her ears. Her hands still trembled sometimes when she reached for a bowl or a bandage. She told herself it was the aftershock of exhaustion. But the trembling had another rhythm now, one that matched the pull in her blood whenever Damien's shadow fell across her. She tried to sort the feelings into neat boxes, duty, gratitude, fear, desire, but the boxes kept breaking open. Damien had not left her side since the rogues had fled. He attended council meetings and battles and then returned to the infirmary as if the place had become a sanctuary he was determined to guard. He watched her with the intense concentration of a man who catalogued everything, the small scar at the base of her thumb, the cupping of her hands when she hummed an old remedy, the way her chin lifted when she refused pity. "Do you ever sleep?" she asked him once, sitting by the low hearth while rain spat against the towers. "Not well," he admitted. "But enough." He set his fingers over hers, warm and steady. For now, watch me, learn that I can be the thing that keeps you breathing when rogues come. She snorted, a little bitter, a little fond. You think I need keeping? I think we all need something, he said. You needed this place. It needed you. There were politics she could not ignore. The council hawked whispers like coins, alliances rearranged like chess pieces. A few evenings a minister would seek a word in a corridor, trying to measure what she cost and what she made. Lila learned to deflect and answer with small truths. She would train, she would aid the fortress, she would not be used. But in private rooms, late at night, the truth sounded different. She had followed a bargain into a world that would not let her be merely a healer. The full moon loomed closer now, fattening with each passing night. The bargain's deadline throbbed at the edges of everything. Damien moved through those days with a fierceness tempered by a strange tenderness, ordering the training, sitting at her shoulder while she practiced drawing the light from patient to cloth, standing guard in the infirmary when the council's curiosity grew too sharp. On the eve of the full moon, the fortress felt as if it held its breath. Torches were brighter, guards more numerous, and the hall hummed with a nervous electricity that made Lila's skin prickle. She had one last evening to herself. She used it to prepare, not for spectacle, but for the question that would come like the tide. Damien found her on the southern balcony where the wind cut the night into cold clarity. The moon hung swollen and silver just beyond the battlements, impartial and immense. He leaned against the stone beside her, the two of them silhouettes carved against the sky. You don't have to do this because you think it will please me, he said quietly. I'm not doing it for you, she answered, though she could not quite keep the tremor from her voice. I'm doing it because I need to know who I am when the world looks at me and asks for everything at once. He turned to look at her then, his profile rigid and soft at the same time. What do you fear most? That I'll lose myself, she said without hesitation. That I'll wake up one day and realize the thing I fought so hard for, freedom, a small life with small joys, has vanished under a crown I never carefully chose. And what do you want most? His question was blunt as a blade. To keep my hands, she said. To still be the woman who counts spoons and steams milk and hums to children bandaged in the infirmary. To never be only a symbol on a throne. He considered her and then, with a slow, deliberate motion, reached for her hands and lifted them to his chest. Then we will find a way, he murmured. I will not make a queen who is a shadow of herself. I want a partner. I want someone who can rule beside me and still laugh in the morning. She looked at him, the vulnerability striking like a fissure of light through stone. Why would you want that when it is harder? She asked. When a queen is supposed to make sacrifices? Because it is harder that makes it worth having. He enclosed her hands and sealed the circle with his thumb. Because you are not a thing to be sacrificed, you are the heart I cannot pretend not to need. The moon climbed, slow and indifferent. The next day would demand answers. Lila pressed her palm to Damien's chest and felt the slow, certain beat beneath, louder than fear, steadier than war. She thought of the café, of steam curling in the morning, of the small ritual of closing drawers and counting tips. She thought of how different those mornings felt now, carrying a sense of weight and possibility she hadn't wanted and could not ignore. That night, sleep was thin and dream-filled, flashes of the rogues, of the infirmary, of Damien's hands. When the dawn bled through the stone, she rose with a resolute calm. The hall filled with eyes, banners, and the ritual movement of a pack waiting for verdict. The ceremony was not grand in the way of court spectacles, no silver crowns, no songs called from the rafters. It was raw and sharp, the way truth is when it is asked plainly. The elders formed a ring, warriors bowed their heads, and Damien took his place before the dais. The moment had the hush of a trial and the promise of a coronation. When he stepped forward and spoke her name, his voice carried across the hall like a vow. Lila of the river town, he said. You have learned our ways, tended our blood, and stood in the face of those who would take what is ours. Will you stand with me as maid and queen? Will you share my name and my bed and the burden that comes with this crown? Her answer came not from rhetoric but from the marrow of experience. Every fevered night, every whispered thanks, every flash of his eyes in which she had seen a man stripped of armor. She thought of the bargain, the choice, the rogues, and the cost of walking away. I will, she said finally. Not because the moon commands it, and not because the crown demands it. Because I choose to stand beside you. I choose to make our name mean something other than fear. Silence broke like rain. Some wolves bowed and wept, others ground their teeth in a quiet that could be respect or envy. Damien stepped down and, in a gesture that stunned more than any formal act, he lifted her hand and brought it to his lips, not as ownership but as benediction. You chose, he said, voice raw. And because you chose, I will be bound to you in ways that are not law but soul. When they walked out of the hall together, side by side, the fortress watched as a new line had been made. Lila's heart still thudded with a wildness she could barely name, love, fear, triumph, surrender, all braided up into one fierce rope. She had not been chained by decree, she had been claimed by choice, by a decision that hurt precisely because it mattered so fiercely. That night, in a small chamber that smelled of herbs and rain, Damien drew her close and whispered, "Take me if you want. Take me because you will, not because you must." She looked into his gold-lit face, the man who had been a storm and a sanctuary, and felt the chain in her chest break into a different shape, no longer an instrument of ownership, but a link forged by mutual pull. She kissed him then, not as surrender but as answer. Her voice came against his mouth, steady and certain, "Then take me." The bond flared like a brand beneath the moon, no capsized fate, only the truth of two wolves choosing to bind the same path. Outside, the fortress breathed with new rhythm. Inside, Lila and Damien sat together as storm and shelter, heart and throne. The full moon rose high and impartial and, for the first time in a long while, it felt like a witness that had been asked and had been answered. The great hall wore the full moon like a crown. Silver light spilled through high windows and pooled across the flagstones, turning banners and armor into liquid light. People filled the benches. Warriors, elders, healers, traitors whose faces had been soldered to loyalty by hunger or fear. News had traveled the way it always did in this place, sharp, eager, and smelling of consequence. There was electricity in the air, even the torches burned with a steadier flame, as if they were trying to hold the night steady for what would follow. Lila moved through the hall not as a frightened girl from a cafe but as someone whose hands had learned what it meant to take a life back from the edge. The robe she wore was simple, no gold or ostentation, but the way people looked at her had the gravity of petitions. Some eyes softened into awe, others were thin and calculating. She kept her chin level and her steps even. This was the moment the bargain had been guiding toward and the knife edge of choice had already been chosen. Damien sat at the throne, not as a distant monarch but as a man who carried the weight of weather and the steadiness of oak. When their gazes met it felt as if two tides acknowledged their meeting place. He stood as she reached the dais. There was no flourish, only the measured movements of two people who had walked storms together and come away bloodied and stubborn. The elder who had given Lila her first test stepped forward. Her voice, used to issuing commands that shaped metal and life, spoke plainly, "Lila of the river town, you have healed our blood, stood when rogues came, and learned what it is to move power without becoming it. Will you accept the claim and stand with the Alpha as maiden queen?" Silence fell like snowfall, complete, waiting. Lila felt the moon in her bones. Her hands, the ones that had cradled fevered foreheads and stitched torn flesh, felt steady. She thought of mornings at the cafe, the small rituals that had anchored her, and of the nights in the infirmary where lives had been kept by touch and oath. She thought of the bargain, a choice given, a test met, a cost accepted with eyes open. "I will stand," she said. "Not because fate demanded it, but because I choose to. I will share the burdens, the blood, and the mercy." I will not be a shadow of myself on a throne. A murmur rolled through the hall. Some bowed heads, a few voices called blessings. A councilman's jaw clenched but did not speak. Damien rose then and came down the steps, stopping beside her rather than above. He raised her hand to his lips, an ancient act, but his look was new, reverent, private, not ownership but a solemn vow. You chose, he said, voice low enough that only those nearest heard the tremor. And because you chose, I will bind my strength to yours until the end of days. The elder dipped her hands into a bowl of cool water and anointed Lila's brow in a ritual older than any politics, salt for truth, ash for memory, rosemary for protection. The hall drew breath and let it out. A healer from the infirmary stepped forward and placed a wreath at Lila's shoulders. Woven from common herbs and wildflowers, proof that rulership here would not be bloodless and detached, but rooted in the living things the people relied on. Then Damien did something those who had watched him for years had never seen. He stepped down from the throne and, instead of seating her beside him, he took her hand and led her to the center of the hall. He raised his voice, not as a command but as an offering. This crown is not mine alone, he declared. It is a charge we carry together. You will be my queen, but I will be your guard and your partner. Any wolf who questions that must answer to both of us. The crowd responded, the sound a blend of applause, howls, and the low rumble of wolves acknowledging a line drawn in the earth. Submission arrived not as capitulation but as recognition. The king had chosen, the healer had answered, the pack had accepted a new axis. There were formalities yet to be managed, oaths, seals, the elder council's assent. The political knives would still be sharp. A few noble houses would whisper about power shifting, old alliances would creak. Lila had not stepped into a world without consequence. If anything, the stakes were higher now because the future of many would be tied to a woman whose hands healed and whose heart had to be taught the language of crowns. After the public rites, when banners were folded and voices dropped to softer tones, Damien led Lila to the private garden carved into the fortress heart, a small, green world hemmed by stone, where moonlight pooled and the air smelled of basil and wet earth. He sat her on a low stone bench and, for the first time in a long while, looked at her not as alpha to claim but as a man who wanted to be seen. You did not give yourself to a crown tonight, he said, fingers tracing the line of her wrist. You gave yourself a promise. And you? She asked. What did you give? He smiled, but it was not triumphant, only honest. I gave my word that I would not make you less to make myself greater. I gave my guard, my patience, and the slow, clumsy work of learning how to be a partner. They lingered there, two figures in moonlight, the fortress humming around them. Outside, the court would shift and the council would angle. Some enemies would plot. The fever's origin was not yet solved, rogues might yet gather under a new flag. But for this night, they held a fragile victory. One woman had chosen to bind herself to a man who vowed to protect her agency rather than erase it. When they rose to go inside, Lila turned and looked out over the battlements. The lands below were a quilt of midnight and lighter fields. Fires in distant villages winked like promises. She felt the crown's weight more as an expectation than a burden, a call to shape mercy into law. Before they re-entered the hall, Damien took her hand again and bowed, not to her as a ruler, but to her as a partner. We will make this kingdom a place that remembers what keeps people alive, he said. And if we fail? She asked, the question not rhetorical. Then we fail together, he answered. But we will fail with our voices and our hands, not as strangers being traded. They stepped back into the fortress where people waited with wine and cautious smiles, ready to celebrate and to plot. Lila felt ready, not complete, not unafraid, but chosen and choosing. The coronation closed a chapter and opened a new one full of politics, peril, and hard-won tenderness. Outside, the moon watched, impartial and silver. But this time its witness felt less like judgment and more like consent. Before we close this chapter of Lila and Damien's story, Do you believe in love that destiny writes, or love we write ourselves? Drop where you're watching from and your answer in the comments. I read every one. If you enjoyed this tale, stay tuned. The feud that birthed the fever still hides its teeth, and the court's whispers haven't stopped plotting.